Hello, everyone. Welcome to Next Gen and Sustainable Finance. I'm Lamisa, joined by my co host Maria Latini. Every episode, we're showcasing the young people, the ideas, and the movements shaping the future of sustainable finance. And we're giving the next gen voices a platform you won't find anywhere else. Whether you're deep in the field or just finding your way in, this one's for you. So glad you're here joining us today. Hi everyone, welcome to the Next Gen podcast. I'm Lamisa and I'm joined today by my co-host Maria Latini. Maria, before we bring Chloe in, I really think we should start with what's happening in the markets because it's very timely and connected to who we're about to bring on today.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's kind of been a mind-blowing week, right? So the big story, Elon Musk is the first trillionaire with SpaceX going public. Reuters said that SpaceX was valued at roughly 94 times trailing revenue at the IPO price, and it couldn't be valued on earnings because it's reported a net loss last year. And obviously, it raises a lot of questions about whether investors are investing or whether investors are speculating. And if you're standing on the sidelines of the market, you see this big company coming to the market. SpaceX is going to go into all the major indices. Everyday investors are going to end up owning it indirectly through their retirement accounts without even making an explicit call on whether they are aligned with those values. It's a huge market moment. Almost everybody is involved in it, but only certain people are allowed to access these types of market moments. And only a few people within the entire investable universe are probably prepared to take that bet. So it's a really interesting time and it really aligns to what we're going to be talking about today.
Honestly, as a young person, I just kept having this thought, what should I do? Should I buy in? Should I not buy in? Because there's all this hype, there's so many headlines. And with all this hype and all this attention, I think people are moving way faster than they should be. And I'm not entirely sure if they understand the risks associated with this.
Exactly. And I mean, it's not even just a SpaceX story, right? It's a broader story about financial literacy, about access to the financial markets, and who's getting high quality advice. So the people with the most resources often get the best information, get the best advisors, get the earliest access, and everyone else is kind of expected to figure it out.
And honestly, I think this is such a good bridge to bringing in our first speakers. Chloe is the founder at Zillennial Advisors because that really is a problem that Zillennial Advisors is trying to solve. Why should personalized financial guidance, whether that's advisory services or financial literacy resources, only be reserved for the people who already have the wealth and already have the resources?
It's so important right now because we're seeing this across investment themes. Like we're seeing space as an investment theme, AI, data centers, private markets. It all sounds super exciting. I would imagine for younger investors, the real question is not just like, what's the next big thing, but how do I understand that next big thing? And how do I actually have access and buy into it?
And I think AI is such a good example of that because even if it sounds abstract, the investment story is really tying in a lot of different issues. There is greater demand for power. It's affecting local communities. Water shortages are becoming a very real problem. So even if there's a lot of hype around AI and everyone, especially young people, want to buy into it, there's a very real sustainability implication. And for young people who care about how they're investing their money, for us to kind of take a step back and think, should I want to buy into this? Should I not? And who do I go to so that I can talk through these concerns and doubts around where the opportunities lie?
And that's where we in sustainable finance just have to be more practical. I think that's why this conversation with Chloe is actually so timely.
Yeah, I think that's why this podcast is so important. We're trying to showcase the next gen voices that are not just reacting to the financial systems they exist in, but trying to actively rebuild solutions to the problems that they're seeing right now. I think that's a great segue to talk about our very first guest, Chloe Sara at the Zillennial Advisors. Chloe did something that most people in finance don't do. They learned exactly how the ultra wealthy build and protect their money, and they walked away from all of it to make sure that everyone could access the same tools. Chloe worked at JP Morgan, Nuveen, learning exactly the tools and access points that the ultra wealthy easily have at their disposal. And drawing on their past experiences, they They founded the Zillennial Advisors to make financial advisory services and financial literacy resources more accessible to everyone. Chloe's work has been helping students, everyday people, and especially the next gen have access to personalized financial education and advisory services that have historically been reserved for the wealthy. Their vision is so transformative, which is why it excites me so much to showcase their work today. So, Chloe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm so grateful to be here with you both. Excited to get into the conversation today.
Chloe, I do want to start at the beginning because I feel like personal story really does set the stage for everything else you've built. So tell us about that experience. Was there a defining moment in your personal or professional experience that made you think, I really want to build something that democratizes access to financial literacy and financial advisory services?
I think it's both a mix of personal life and professional career experience. I grew up just outside of one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the country and saw firsthand how people can put in the same effort and get wildly different outcomes and results. So from an early age, I realized it wasn't really an intelligence gap that we're seeing here, it's an access gap. And we've all heard the phrase a million times, life isn't fair. That's very true. I heard it a lot growing up when I was fighting with my brother.
We all
my
did.
mom wanted, to try and explain that sometimes things just aren't fair. But I found over the course of my career that sometimes, yes, we're born into situations that determine probably more than they should, but also people create systems that make life unfair. If we built the systems that can make life unfair, we can also build other systems that go against that or change that. I actually did a social entrepreneurship program at Brown University where I learned you don't really have to choose between building a business and solving a real problem. And I started my career at JP Morgan in the private bank. I learned how advice works for the ultra wealthy, then pivoted to Align Impact where I assessed impact in public investment strategies, and then at Nuveen where I was able to oversee responsible investing at scale and understand what that looks like from the institutional side. The through line of it all for me was really bringing that level of guidance that I experienced at JP Morgan to the people it was never built for. And that's how the Zillennial Advisors really came to be.
I think that's really important, and I think that kind of sets the stage for what we wanted to talk about in the platform that you built. Obviously, it seems like just from what you've indicated, the mission or your idea was to fill that gap and give access to people who might not normally have it or might not know where to look. I think a lot of times maybe the resources may be out there, but so tell us a little bit more about Zillennial Advisors. When did it start? What were the challenges and how did you get it off the ground?
Definitely. I'll go into a bit of the mission and like the gap and how it really started, right? I was actually introduced to my co-founder, one of our old roles, and we started talking. The first conversation we actually ever had was about this gap that existed. And CA was built on this mission of democratizing access to financial advice and financial literacy. We really noticed that in the work that we were doing, the resources are there, but they're only there for certain people with a certain level of wealth. And we came to understand that people mostly misdiagnose this as a knowledge problem. You're not informed, so you don't know, and so you don't do anything about it, right? The real story is that there's a financial literacy gap, there's also an access gap, and I think the real guidance has always existed, right? There have always been the large financial institutions that are serving the high net worth and the ultra high net worth clients on their personal advisories, but they're gated by AUM minimums. That's how most traditional firms work, is they make their money by managing money. And if you don't have money to manage, then you're not a target of the resources that currently exist. So at the Zillennial Advisors, we really bring this to life with two products. We have Wealth Academy, which is our financial literacy platform. We license it to universities, nonprofits, institutions to meet individuals where they already are. And then we have Parity, which is our fully digital SEC registered financial advisor that meets the users where they are and helps them navigate their personal financial goals.
Chloe, that's really interesting what you said, that currently the way traditional advisory firms work, you need to have a certain amount of money to be able to even access that service. There's so many young people like you and I who don't have that kind of net worth. So how can we then go ahead and leverage these tools to build our wealth and financial literacy? When I came across what Zillennial Advisors was doing, I was so excited. I just kept thinking, oh, we need to have Chloe on this podcast. Your journey felt really fascinating to me. You started from JP Morgan. You also spent some time at Nuveen before you founded your own firm. And that's a very exciting career. As you advance in this field, what's the change you think the next generation of finance leaders simply can't ignore?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Right now, something that can't be ignored is the advisor supply. So if you're looking in the personal financial advisory industry, the advisor supply is collapsing as the demand with the next generation is exploding, right? We have more people than ever who need access to these resources, and there aren't enough financial advisors to support them. McKinsey said by 2034, we're going to have 100,000 advisor shortfall. That means that there won't be about a third of the advisor headcount that's needed to actually cover the wealth that exists. So advisors are retiring faster than the industry can actually replace them. And setting the mission of the Zillennial advisors aside, that math doesn't work. There aren't enough advisors to actually advise the wealth that exists, and wealth is continuing to be created every day, right? So my thought for the leader of the next generation is to be mindful around what the needs are of the next generation and not just what the needs have been for prior generations, because the needs aren't really the same, and they're not meant to be. Every generation has their unique struggles, their unique expectations, and their unique way of approaching personal finances. I think my best guess of the winners will probably be those who digitize and meet the wealth where it's at, as opposed to continuing with the current model.
And, from my perspective, right, I often say this to Lanissa because I have two early 20s sons who, again, use platforms and do their own trading and have their own perspectives. What they're really looking for is impact. There's a couple things that come to mind and maybe a reflection from what you just said. One is building trust with your potential clients. So I think with the younger generation specifically, who may be looking at a digitized platform and maybe not a traditional model like their parents, how do you build trust with your potential clients? And how do you adapt that gap right now between what the industry says it wants for younger investors and what it actually delivers?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important point. Only 30% of Gen Z feel confident making financial decisions or feel supported in that. So the trust isn't being built, and the tools that exist aren't actually getting across to those individuals who need to make those financial decisions. And I think part of it is the language that's being used. Part of it is the amount of education that needs to be done for the individual to be able to actually understand what they're looking at. If we're talking about impact and investments that are responsible investments or impact investments, there are so many resources out there that exist, and I only know most of them because of the previous jobs I've had. I did diligence on public markets, impact investments, so I understand the resources and tools publicly available, but an individual who might not work in finance probably doesn't know that those tools exist. I think going back again to the access gap, we have these resources that exist. There are new resources every day that help us assess what is available on the markets, what we can invest in. But we've heard it directly from Gen Z investors and young adults. And Maria, I'm sure your sons have felt this way as well. The products don't feel like they're built for them. They feel like they're built for people who have income, and perhaps there's branding that says we're targeting this new young market, but the language underneath it or the resources underneath it and the way that it's built isn't built actually with the intention of the young next gen investor in mind.
Chloe, what you said resonates with me so much, that the products being built right now are not really developing with the next generation in mind. And that makes me want to take a step back. The systems level changes that are needed to actually address the needs and the priorities of the next generation. I would love to learn more about how you think about this. You've described your approach to impact as rooted not in what you screen out, but who you finally let in. What's a mindset shift that you think could genuinely change how impact gets created, not just talked about?
Yeah, I think for me, the mindset shift means building with impact in mind and placing structures with impact in the foreground, not as an afterthought. I think a lot of what we see in the impact world is taking what we have and then assessing the impact and measuring and monitoring the impact after the fact, as opposed to building with the intention of positive impact. So in the world I'm currently existing in, you're building for people who were historically left out of the conversation, didn't have access to resources, and that's the mission. We are not just building a resource and then going back to track the impact that we might be creating. We're being intentional about creating that structural, durable impact building it up front and not just measuring it next. For next gen investors, building the rails so people never served before can actually participate. So it's an entire system shift, not just a portfolio filter.
Look, I think over the past maybe decade or two, we've been kind of trying to jam a square peg into a round hole and assuming that new clients, that new audience would just want things the way they were, or they would understand what they were receiving and understand the message as we were communicating it. And I just don't think it's that way anymore. And you see that even in how younger generations are learning and how they're currently communicating and how they're even thinking about their career. And maybe that's a nice time to seg a little bit. Your career arc is really inspiring. Many of them are in the early stages of their career and really trying to figure out when they should stay within a bigger institution, when to bet on themselves and move on. Younger people don't want to be working for the man, right? They want to actually be entrepreneurial and believe in themselves and perhaps not start out in a traditional career with a big firm. So talk a little bit, about going from JP Morgan and Nuveen, who are established institutional asset managers, to founding your own firm. That seems to be a significant leap. So what inspired you to make that leap?
Yeah, I think no two careers are the same. So what I say is definitely for me and not necessarily for everyone else. But my most used skill actually is not a finance skill I acquired at all. It's definitely a creative problem solving. I've actually been doing pottery since I was 12 and I'm a lifelong puzzler. I competed at the National Jigsaw Puzzle Competition last year. Both of those things, I think, train the same muscle for me. It is, finding the structure in a messy, undefined picture. And at a big institution, yes, you're solving real problems, but the problem's pretty defined, for at least the way that my perspective was. Whereas at a startup, we have to figure out what the right questions are before figuring out the problems. So even before we're getting to an answer, we have to think a lot and be creative with it.
I think it's really interesting that you are actually the client that you're designing for. What might I miss, or an older generation miss, by trying to address the same problem or gap that you've seemingly so successful noticed and are addressing?
There are various reasons as to why solving your own problems are often successful. I was building financial plans for high net worth and ultra high net worth clients. That was my day job. But I, at that time, was still feeling anxious about my own finances. And I was managing the finances of millions or more, significant assets. And I thought, if I feel this way, then a lot of people must feel this way. Spoke to family and friends about it. They did feel that way. And they're all very capable, competent human beings. They just don't work in finance or personal finance. So because of that, I realized that this was a real problem and not just something that was existing in my head for me to struggle with alone. ZA actually started as a one-to-one financial advisory service where we realized people had questions. Our network needed answers to their problems. So that's what we did. That network of people who wanted answers grew. And our team couldn't really grow. We were doing it part-time and trying to figure out how to provide answers in a meaningful way. And so that meant using technology to scale. So designing from the inside means we're designing for us. We know the language that our users understand. We know the language they don't. We know what the barriers are.
Chloe, your big picture mission behind Zillennial Advisor resonates so much with me. The fact that you are actively trying to democratize access to these resources is something that is so important. I think there are disparate resources out there. If you want to learn investing, there's one platform. If you want to have better savings, you have another website that tells you that. But then how does it all come holistically together, and how do you really think through it without having a gazillion dollars in your bank account? It's normally the entry point for so many financial advisory platforms. It's so impossible. So as a young person, it's so important that you're building a platform because it gives everyday people and the young generation an opportunity and a platform.
Thanks, Lamisa. I feel like I should also say I never intended to be a founder or build a company. It really is just something that happened organically based on the need that exists. You work in finance and you mentioned your personal financial anxiety around managing your own finances. We all have questions every day that we don't know if we should answer ourselves. And then we ask the internet, we ask our friends, our family, and we can't afford financial advisors, and we don't know how to answer questions that we don't know exist. That's really what parity is meant to do. It's meant to help you ask the questions that you don't know exist yet, and then build a plan to answer those questions.
Well, Chloe, I think that's fantastic. I know we're getting close to the end, but there is something that I really want to ask. What gives you optimism about the future of impact and sustainable work as someone who's worked on it closely through Align, and what still concerns you?
I'm going to start with the concerns so we can end on a high note. Incumbents or the large financial institutions are adopting the language of impact substance. So greenwashing 2.0, right? We've seen a lot of that, and I'm sure that's continuing to happen. So that's concerning. The optimistic view that I have is this podcast existing, just the next gen taking on the reins and building and growing what everyone before us has worked so hard on. We have such a wealth of knowledge in the impact and sustainable investing world that came before us, and knowing that there are people like you, Lamisa, and people like me who are building for the next gen with this intentionality, that is where my optimism comes from, that we will hopefully be the generations to solve some of these really, really important problems.
I appreciate the call out to the podcast. I think it only is as rich as the people who are on it. And what makes this so special is the opportunity to showcase people like you. That's what gives me hope.
I mean, it's not really our goal at USIF to amplify voices such as yours, right? We're really excited about our forum that's coming up next week. So we want to capture the voices and the excitement. And we want to make sure that we, are constantly, our tagline says, adding more seats at the table. Missa is the driving force behind this, and I'm honored to be part of it. And, it's fantastic to have our almost inaugural podcast episode with you, Chloe, because you are truly an inspiration.
Thank you both so much for having me and for creating this space. I'm really excited about it and looking forward to hearing all the other episodes and see all the other incredible next gen thinkers and talent that exists in this space.
Thank you so much, Chloe. We are so excited that we were able to have you. Finally, to our listeners, if this episode resonated with you, please share it with one person who needs to hear it. That's genuinely how we grow. And if you haven't already, leave us a review. I'm Lamisa, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.